Hello, everyone, and you're all very welcome to today's Client Experience Programme webinar on creating strategic in-house legal function plans that attract buy-in and investment. Whether it's your very first time joining us today, or perhaps you've been with us since the start of the series, you're all very welcome. The focus of this program is on providing practical insights and learnings on some of the biggest issues facing in-house legal teams. We're very excited about the growth of the community. At this point, we're at over 3,000 in-house legal team members around the world, which is quite exciting. I would encourage you to take the opportunity to connect with others on the call today, and indeed with our speakers, and really make the most of that networking opportunity. Equally, we'd love you. This session is about you. We would love you to get involved. So do drop into the chat your observations, your experience. That can certainly benefit others. And do make the most, any questions you have for the speakers, and make the most of that opportunity also. Your views, input, and perspectives are really central to how we continue to evolve and develop this program. With that in mind, I'm very excited to share with you a piece of research that we carried out within this community, so our Client Experience Program community. As a firm, it's really critical that we're able to support you and your in-house legal team in growing, protecting, operating, and helping to finance your organizations. And this is exactly where this survey is set. The sample size for the survey is 100 respondents across 28 countries, and we've also supplemented it with some in-depth interviews. We will actually be sharing some of the findings of the survey as we work through today's discussion, and you can access it after the session at the website link you'll see on the screen. We know it will be of value to you in helping to benchmark and contrast the priorities and risks that your in-house legal team are facing relative to other teams around the world. And this session is all about those priorities. Without further ado, I am delighted to be able to pass you over to my colleague Saeem Sophie, who will take you through the rest of today's session.
Good morning, evening, afternoon, everybody. Absolutely delighted and thrilled to be here. It's the second session for the day, so it's been a long day for some of us, but this time around we promise to make it even bigger and better. It's hard to top 95 people on the meeting link already, but you'll soon see that I'm joined by a galaxy of talent and some true colleagues and friends, and I'll introduce them in a second. As for me, I am Zaim. I'm the current head and senior partner of the South African office looking after the energy and the ESG practices back here in SA. I'm based in lovely Cape Town. Prior to that, I was a GC for BP in Africa, looking after Africa midstream and downstream. And I spent 3 years towards the end of the 14 years in London, looking after the global lubricants business, as well as the global new markets business as a group AGC. And prior to that, I spent about 8 years with a tier 1 corporate firm. I will ask my colleagues to introduce themselves and to share perhaps just a snippet of why today is of such importance and value, not just to hopefully to the audience, but also to them and their own experience to share. I'll share mine towards the end once we get into the agenda, but I think without further ado, I'm going to turn to Kenny Robertson. Kenny, over to you.
Thanks, Ian. Hi, everyone. I'm Kenny Robertson. I head up the outsourcing technology and IP legal team at NatWest. NatWest, for those not in the UK, is one of the main banks in the UK. I'm really happy to be here, really interested in the topic. Strategic alignment is something which is really important to us as a team. I think it's important to some of the questions we ask ourselves around what kind of lawyers we want to be, what we need to be. And I'm interested to learn from my esteemed other panelists in terms of different approaches. So yeah, I'm pleased to be here.
Thank you, Kenny. And then we'll turn to another colleague and friend. Scott, over to you.
Thank Thanks. Hi, so I'm Scott Singer. I'm a commercial and technology partner based in our London office. I'm chair of Denton's Helix, which is the reason I'm here to talk to you today. Denton's Helix is a part of Denton's where we work with our clients quite differently on putting together dedicated teams of lawyers who are clustered around the sort of work clients need doing. And we arm them with all sorts of technology and innovation and different sorts of process change, which allows them to operate incredibly efficiently. And through doing that, we can deliver work very cost efficiently. And so we charge our clients differently as well. We charge clients as a fixed annual fee, passing those savings on and collecting huge amounts of data, which we then share with clients to help give them insights into their business so that they can engage more meaningfully with their stakeholders, but also to feed it through to what we're doing so we can continue improving and become more efficient. And so this particular session is of huge interest to us, and we spend a lot of time working with our clients on all the sorts of challenges we're going to be hearing about today.
Scott, thank you. Lovely. And for those on the link, if you're not won over yet, as I said, we've got a universe of talent. If you're not won over yet with that threesome, let me introduce the best for last. And over to you, Marianne.
Thank you very much, Zim. Happy to be with you. I am Marianne Hines, Senior Counsel at Denton's. I was the first woman in the Fortune 500 as a general counsel and CLO. And I have been the general counsel of 5 global companies in 5 different industries, ranging from publishing, computers, big data, aerospace and engineering, mining and chemicals, oil and gas, and worldwide food production. I have served nearly 15 CEOs over 35 years, and plus I've served on numerous boards. The topic today is a passion for me, and it's been a journey. And I truly believe that lawyers are leaders, and I hope that this session will help you to be even stronger leaders. Thank you.
Lovely, Marianne, and really true friends and colleagues. And I speak for myself, and not least in Marianne with the wisdom and experience. Thank you for sharing. A little bit of context from me on today's session. Before we get into the agenda, I think picking up where Marianne left off, why is this important for me? Why do we feel there's value to add here? I think the first is that we're all in this community together. In one sense, we're all challenged. We're challenged first and foremost by costs. I don't think any of us don't face cost challenges in some shape or form without a day passing. The second, of course, is there is increasing external volatility and challenge. We are in highly volatile economic and political times. We've all seen supply chain disruptions, both in the pandemic and the trailing effects. We've seen the onset of service provision disruption, not just in the supply of services, but in the way in which services are provided and the choices of services, which may seem like a great thing, but of course can be quite bewildering. We've all seen the growth and the advent and the almost the creeping in of tech, not just as a subject, but in the way we go about doing things that some of us have done for several years, and in the way in which new lawyers come and practice as in-house counsel today compared to perhaps how they may have done this several years ago. And then, of course, as I mentioned, there is the hard stuff of the ways of working. It's not just virtual working, but actually in what people expect of a working environment. And all of those challenges, of course, mean one thing: opportunity. Opportunity for efficiencies, opportunity for resilience, opportunity for leadership, and opportunity, probably above all, for being integrated into the business and being a true partner with the business. And that, I think, takes us neatly on to the agenda items for today. And Neve, if you can just move on the slide, please. Thank you. So we'll talk today about strategic alignment and stakeholder engagement. In a broad sense, what is it? Why does it matter? We'll share some data, we'll share some insights, but more importantly, we'd like to bring the experience of this panel to bear and also get the audience to engage and ask questions both in the chat and if they feel the need to unmute. We'll talk about operationalizing delivery. That's where individuals like Scott and the Project Helix team come into their own. They've not only seen the development of legal process outsourcing, having moved from simple things like task disaggregation and automation, but today they are proudly able to deliver services as a process outsourcing and engineering outfit to some of the biggest names in the business. And Scott will share some of those insights, including some tips and tools, which I hope you'll all find valuable and able to take away and deploy in your own businesses. And then finally, of course, reporting. Now, reporting for most in-house counsel is the sort of end of month or beginning of month or mid-month drudgery and bane of their existence, right? But reporting is, of course, more. It's about not just having done the good job, but being able to demonstrate, underpin, science the good job that's being done, to use it as an engagement tool. And if that is not persuasive enough, when it comes to bonus and performance negotiation time, 3 reports in a row, as far as lawyers are concerned, is a classic case of estoppel, so that nobody can say they weren't told so. So there is value in reporting, but there's also a need for efficiency in reporting, as much as there is a need for reporting to bring teams together and to alter behaviors. But before we get too much into the detail, let me turn back to Niamh to run a bit of a poll just to get a sense check of where this audience wants to go relative to today's subjects. So you'll find the poll on your screens. If you could please respond. There are approximately, I think, 60 seconds to do so, and we'll look at the results. Thank you.
And so we'd love to know which of the following areas you're most keen for us to spend time and to focus the discussion on today. Is it strategic alignment and stakeholder engagement? Maybe it's legal operations and you'd really welcome a good discussion on that. Or perhaps it's reporting, as Zaim's just referenced. It's great to see lots of people already voting. We'd love some more. So we will leave it open for just a few more seconds to give everyone an opportunity. So great. So let's give it 5, 4, 3, 2. I can see some last minute votes coming in there. 1. Okay, and we will end the poll and share the results with you all. Okay, Zaim.
Yeah, thank you. That's an interesting split, Niamh. It's certainly different, and Scott, you'll agree, it's different from this morning's poll. What's encouraging is that there seems to be a high degree of calibration, I guess is the word, between what we're here to discuss and the interest area, with topic number 1 being at 55%. What is, I'm not sure whether it's interesting or concerning, is whether reporting is represented or well represented at 6% and 6 out of 93 respondents. But I'm going to go so far as to say that when Scott and the team do some of the more practical stuff, I think reporting comes into its own. So if we have the time, Niamh, it would be great to rerun the poll and just see whether the stats on reporting have changed by the end of it all. But having said that, if we can perhaps move to the next slide and get started with the first subject, which is strategic alignment and stakeholder engagement. I think the way to best introduce this is to reintroduce the subject of the Global In-House Legal Insights Survey. So if we could turn to the next slide, thank you. And as Niamh will have explained, this was a poll of essentially this community in its extended form. And there were 10 questions, if I remember correctly, that were asked of this group. And it was interesting because certainly there was a common theme coming out of several of the questions. And when we get to the next slide, which we won't turn to just yet, 4 questions in particular elicited very tightly connected themes, which we'll talk about. But starting at the top, the one that stuck out the most was whether the agenda was one of growth or a reactive task of protecting revenue or protecting reputation or avoiding risk, alignment with the business was seen as key to empowering the in-house legal team. And of course, alignment with the business can come in multiple forms. So let's unpack that a little bit and move to the next slide, where those 4 questions elicited similar and linked themes. The first question, as you'll see, and we're not going to read out the entire slide, but certainly the questions were focused from 1 to 4 on the actions required to support revenue growth, the challenges that were faced in supporting the revenue growth imperative, again, the actions to be taken to manage risk, and again, the most significant risks facing the organization. And if one looks at the answers provided, again, if one looks at, for example, first column, second bullet, aligning the resources to the organization strategy and goal, participating, and that goes beyond just, I think, integrating. It's meaningful participation. I think most mature legal functions have some level of participation, even if it's on a request basis to provide data, but meaningful participation that results in collaboration, in alignment, in co-creation, I think is very different. Similarly, with the challenges being faced, how many of us have not experienced the first one, right? A good quarter of the respondents speaking about being brought in too late. And we'll talk a little bit later about how to be brought in a little bit earlier or early enough in the process. Again, in the third question, in relation to the actions to be taken to manage risk and reputation, integration, the theme of prioritization, the theme of being proactive, again, recurring and linked themes. And then finally, in relation to the risks, interestingly, business team awareness, and I think, again, a very common experience for general counsels and for legal functions. But business teams awareness, I think most counsel would agree, is the front line of risk and risk management. As much as legal functions, internal control functions, audit functions, compliance functions try to do what they need to do, the reality is those risks manifest at the front end where business people are most active. But you don't just come here to hear from me. So I think without further ado, let me invite Scott for some perspectives and then turn to Kenny and Marianne, and perhaps to share some experiences as to how this correlates or calibrates with their own experiences. Scott, over to you.
Thanks, Simon. I'm just going to be very quick, actually, because like you, I'm keen to hear from Kenny and Marianne as well, who have lots of real life experience. I think what we see is clients with their legal teams very often struggling to move out of the zone where they're looked at as a cost center, you know, the opportunity to engage earlier on and more strategically is something which, in our experience, can take quite a long time to change. Actually, sometimes the change of leadership can accommodate that, but we've definitely found working with clients that any sort of engagement with their client base is very helpful. I can think of one particular client actually who really couldn't work out why it was that the sort of relationship felt so remote, and they just felt that the team was kind of receiving stuff to do without really ever quite being brought in at the right time. And they actually did kind of like a customer feedback survey around all of the key business partners and stakeholders in the business, asking what they thought of legal. And the feedback came back was fascinating, because the consensus was it was a very hard working team who are kind of so busy working they didn't have enough time to really sort of step outside that and engage in being involved earlier on. So it was a bit of a vicious cycle. And what that client then did was look at opportunities to change the actual work content the team was doing, a theme which we'll come back to a bit later on.
Kenny, thank you. I think perhaps before we turn to, Scott, before we turn to Kenny and last again, Marianne, could I suggest, Neve, that you run the second poll, and maybe we can just bring the poll data together with the live experiences and see where the conversation goes. So if everyone on screen can see, or everyone can see what's on screen and respond, about 60 seconds, I think we've got for that. Thank you.
Okay, so this is really digging into, if you like, this area in a little bit more detail. So when it comes to strategic alignment and stakeholder engagement, what do you find is the most challenging aspect? Is it building business cases, attracting investment? Maybe it's the time it takes in terms of that stakeholder engagement. It could be changing organizational priorities, aligning the activities of your team to those strategic priorities, quantifying the value of the function activities, or if it's something else, just pop it into the chat and let us know. So lots of engagement coming in. We'd love to get as many views as possible again on this one. So we will give it just a few more seconds. So we'll do our usual 5, 4, 3, 2. Any last minute votes coming in there? There is 1. Excellent. And we will close the poll. Still moving. So we'll close it now and share the results.
Niamh, thank you. For those who follow rugby, this is closer than the SA Ireland game. And since Ireland is playing Scotland next, I'm going to hand over to Kenny for some commentary on the stats that have flashed up and your own experiences in this area.
The way things are going at World Cup for us, I'm not sure I really want to continue the rugby theme too far. I'm not surprised at those results. I mean, I think that quantifying the value of legal function activities, I've been in-house for over must be about 20 years now. Scott touched on this earlier on about moving beyond just being a cost centre. That's been a frustration of mine in terms of us showcasing the value that we can bring. Sometimes I wonder, how do we help ourselves enough? And I've seen a change in that in recent years around us moving from being back office, from being reactive. Some of the comments earlier on, some of the data that you produced, Niamh, earlier on, spoke to me around having a seat at the table. How do we go about getting a seat at the table? How do we go about making sure that stakeholders want to come and engage with us, not because they have to? And some of the sort of tools that we've tried to focus on is asking ourselves those types of questions. So are we curious enough about the businesses that we support? Do we really understand how our organisation makes money? Do we understand what specific stakeholders are worrying about? And how can we help them? What stuff are we doing beyond the legal work? What can we bring to the table to support them and help them? So there's fairly existential points in there about what is our role, what's our role going forward, and how do we make sure that stakeholders want to engage with us and making sure that we get our hands dirty. Some of that means we need to be brave. We need to step outside our normal role of I just manage legal risk to I want a much more, what I would see, interesting, exciting, engaging role where I feel I'm adding value. But by leaning into stakeholders, I think, in my experience anyway, that's really been key to us getting that seat at the table.
Thank you, Kenny. Absolutely spot on. I think with that, and Marianne, given your experience in having sat on and having counseled several boards, but having dealt with a real array of enterprises in different sectors and segments, what are your thoughts on both getting stakeholder engagement and strategic alignment, but also on timely buy-in? Because the theme of timely buy-in seems to be coming through quite a bit. Marianne?
Thank you, Zim. You know, as a director and a general counsel, I can assure you that strategic alignment and shareholder engagement are table stakes. You're at the table. How do you create value? How do you demonstrate that every day you are there to align? That alignment attracts buy-in and investment, and the plans are critical to establish your leadership and demonstrate your EQ. Your colleagues will better understand your actions are totally intertwined with their ambitious plans. It critically links the general counsel to the annual strategic plan and your 5-year plan. Where are they going? How are you aiding them? It links with ERM, you know, the risks It's wise for the GC to give both the board of directors and fellow executives a view of what's on the horizon. And it paves the way for budget approval and buy-in for your proposed programs and policies. If something's important, fight for it. Don't cheap out, be bold, and that will get their attention. You can define the the scope of your responsibilities and decide how you're going to do it inside or out. Bringing your deeply trusted outside counsel into your planning raises the likelihood of great success and helps you look around the corners. I can tell you that when you quantify their risk and you quantify their opportunities, they will be listening to you. They will be supporting you. At one of the companies I was at, IMC Global, they had outsourced the entire law department. How about that? What a situation to walk into. That's how much they love their lawyers, and they'd had a very poor acquisition that was really hurting the company greatly. So I walked into the executive meeting and I said, okay, there's a new sheriff in town. I have a matrix here. Here are all your functions, and here is your attorney. I want you to bring them into your strategy sessions. I don't want you to come to them when you think you have a legal problem, because trust me, that's way too late. And I was really gratified by the attitude and by the inclusion that came from that meeting. So this is a place for you to define your leadership, and certainly being aligned with the goals is absolutely critical. The CEO there had what he called a bowling chart for every function, major function of the company, and that included the lawyers, where you talked about and you quantified what your activities were and how much they would contribute to the bottom line. You never have to worry about getting alignment and respect from your colleagues and from the board when you do that. So I can tell you, as a director, you notice it right away. The first questions I have, what are you doing and how does that add to the bottom line?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I think it links brilliantly into the next point, and that is the strategic planning roadmap. But before you put away the poll results, Niamh, I think the way, also marrying it to some of the responses and the insights you've heard, I think the simple point is all of these elements matter. And perhaps the weighting is different, the context is different from enterprise to enterprise, but there's nobody in the room who's going to say this stuff doesn't count. It probably, frankly, don't understand why. So that, I think, leads us nicely into the next slide, which is the strategic planning roadmap. Now, for the experienced counsel and those who are project familiar and, dealt with several capital value project processes, there's nothing new in here. The flow of the process starts with understanding where you are, defining where you'd want to go, building the vehicle to get you there, and then assessing, measuring, and reporting, and I'd add continuously re-evaluating and continuous improvement flow cycles. However, what I hope is of more value would be some of the elements, the specific elements that are indicated in the slide as being of importance. So let's call out a few of them in each of the columns. In current state, we all know about corporate priorities, the corporate plan, the horizon scanning, and knowing who your stakeholders are, to Marianne's point. But how many of the lawyers in in-house functions truly leverage the data that's available? And therein lies one of the disconnects. By data, I mean your own performance data, spend data, people data, data on your service providers, data on how many business calls are emanating from one particular division. The disconnect, I think, lies in the fact that legal functions are increasingly being measured on a data-centric basis, and yet legal functions are very weak in utilizing the available data at their own disposal and speaking in a language that I think the business understands. Defining the future state, again, these are fairly obvious, but I think the key theme here is, as much as we want to be immersed in the business and understand the business, if we don't know what as a legal function or as a law department we want to be, and you don't know where you want to go, as I said in the earlier call, any road will take you there. Building the plan, fairly obvious, I think. The objectives, the KPIs, and I'm going to leave this for Scott a little bit later because Scott's got some specific examples as to where and how these can be drawn in. And then, of course, implementing, measuring, and reporting, in particular, the element of regular review, because even at the most crude point of performance assessment and bonus discussions and budget discussions, data, measurement, alignment, report back, and dealing with queries and challenges all matter. But there are 3 points that I just want to leave us with before I turn to Scott on operationalizing delivery. And it's the same thing that I said this morning. It's all well and good doing this stuff. However, how many of us, being honest, we don't have a poll on the screen for this, but how many of us, being honest, don't have the following experience? We construct the plan, and then we go back to the day job. And what's the day job? Whoever's first in your inbox has the most number of red exclamation marks, is the most senior, or has the most overdue matter. And then finally, as if one disconnect's not good enough, there too, you put the plan away. The only time you see it again is in 6 monthly, or if you're lucky, quarterly, or if you're not so lucky, annual performance appraisals. And then you find the most crafty legal skill available and the elegant drafting to try to retrofit what should have been the plan in motion every day when you write up the performance appraisals. That's not a confession on my part, but I do think that's an experience, certainly by some of the colleagues, I hope, if we're all being honest. Scott, with that, over to you.
Thank you. Thanks so much. So if we just move on to the next slide. So what I wanted to share was just a tool really, around how in-house teams might go around changing it up a little bit, and having a closer alignment with the business's strategy, changing their position within the organization. And as Zim said, the truth is that for I think many teams, many clients we work with, it's just there's just not space for that sort of process or that conversation. People are just trying to deal with the work that comes in, and as Kenny said, that there's a lot of cost pressure. Legal teams are cost centers, and so trying to do more for less means that teams are really just really trying to get through what's coming in every day, and in particular trying to service whoever maybe has the most urgent or the loudest demands. So it's very hard to be strategic. There's quite a few models out there. What this model does is one that we work through with our clients and Dentons Helix as a starting point is just to try to map a 2x2. So you've got on the y-axis exposure to risk, the x-axis is strategic importance, and the exercise to do, it doesn't need to be scientific. You can plot it yourself. You can get team members to just to plot it kind of anecdotally. Just plot sort of where actually is the work landing. And so you've got in the bottom left-hand corner, you've got work which is low risk and low strategic importance. This is your classic BAU work, which all businesses have loads of, predominantly, in fact. That sort of churn stuff, it just has to get done. You've got then moving up the y-axis, work which is not strategically important, but is actually quite risky. And it's important that it's done properly. That could be regulatory stuff, investigations, HR, compliance, and potentially specific contracts. And then moving through the 2x2, you've got in the bottom right-hand corner work that is strategically important. It's critical to your competitive advantage, but actually doesn't carry a high level of risk with it. And then your top right is work which is both strategically important and which carries high levels of risk. And the question is, where is your team spending most of their time? When we've done this with clients, many of them concluded that too much time is spent in the bottom left-hand corner by their teams. And depending on where you want to get to, but I think certainly based on the comments and conversations that we have, lots of teams would really like to move into the top right-hand corner as much as they could. And so what the tool does, it just sort of creates an opportunity for you to try to change that up and to realign what the team's doing, and in particular think about, well, look, the work's still there. How do we create space in order for the team to be able to spend a bit more time business partnering? So they're building up the relationships, which means that they can be brought in early on in the piece, and be more strategic and more aligned with the organization strategy. So that was all I wanted to say on this model. And perhaps if we just whiz on to the next slide, and then I'll pause, because I'd love some comments and some thoughts from Kenny and from Marianne on this. But one of the very interesting aspects to come out of the research, which Nick mentioned we carried out early on, was around the actions you can take to improve your legal team's operational efficiency. What sort of stuff can you do? And you can see the results here are quite strikingly speak for themselves. I wanted to pick out just a few aspects here, which in our experience working with clients in Dentons Helix really move the dial in terms of operational efficiency. These are things you can do to free up time from the legal team, which means that the team can spend more time being strategic in business partnering. And actually, the first of those, I think, probably is a word around automation. So we can say automate routine or administrative tasks. Document automation technology these days is great. It's come a long way. If anybody's used it, I ask actually because I was speaking a few months ago at a general counsel's forum organised by the Lawyer magazine, and we did a straw poll asking GCs to what extent are you using document automation. It was a very small minority of businesses, perhaps around 10% were using this, and where they were, it was generally around very simple documents like NDAs, to be honest. So I think the word here is that the technology has come on a long way now. You can automate all sorts of things. I mean, at Dentons, through Helix, and even more broadly, we do everything. We automate our corporate SPA, for example, or our full outsourcing agreement to give people a great head start on drafting. But we also automate, simpler documents like goods and services agreements and leases and so on. So it's really worth thinking about it. Our experience is that the efficiency gains you get from that is incremental. It's, maybe 10% of time you can save on an activity, but it's worth having when it adds up for sure. Actually, one of the other areas that comes out in this poll quite loud and clear, which I think is more of a game changer, and which sits very well with automation, is around self-service. And this is around, for those who sort of haven't come across this quite fashionable term, it's around getting the business to do its own legal work, stuff you don't need lawyers to do. In our experience, a minority of organizations are doing that with any sort of like material legal contracts, but businesses that are quite consumer facing will have that for signing up customers. But for, if you like, sort of B2B type stuff, it's comparatively unusual. And yet what we found again, clients who really invest in it can save huge amounts of time. It is really, if you give people in the business, if you give them tools, if you give them document automation, if you give them training, it's really quite empowering for them to be able to go and do some of their own deals. And the legal team not to walk away from it, but still be there as a port of call if people get stuck or it gets complicated and so on. So that's the second one. And just the third one that I thought I would mention very briefly is actually one of the oldest tricks in the book, which is around precedents and playbooks. There's nothing clever about that at all. It's really old-fashioned. But it is something that us teams are in different states with. There's some that have got fantastic suites, knowledge organisation. Others never really get the chance to get around to it. But actually, the efficiency gains you can get through having really well thought out precedents, where you've actually challenged yourself to think about, do I really need to ask for that? Could I ask something which is a bit more commercially balanced and, more achievable going in, so you have less negotiation, where people invest maybe in creating other tools alongside the documents like playbooks, which will give our people the ability themselves to work out what to do as fallbacks and so on in negotiations. This really can move the dial. I mean, the time savings you can get from that could be 30% at least on doing an average deal, but it does take an upfront investment. So I was just going to pause at that point because we've got a great panel here, Zain, and I'm sure people have got some interesting experience to share.
So Scott, and just before Kenny, you and Marianne comment as well, can I just mention there were two comments and questions in the chat. And I'm pleased to say one is from a good friend, colleague, and client, and she's still with us, so we can't be doing too badly, everybody. But they really bang on questions. The one was from Sarah Aziz, really saying reporting is the why, so I would start there. And then from Maxine Burton at Croda, talking about how we triage BAU, but at the same time assess risk and, of course, get alignment on the fact that this work's not going to be done. So apologies for the brief interruption, but Kenny, perhaps you first, and then you, Marianne, on your own experiences in how to improve operational efficiency against the backdrop of some of those questions. Thank you.
Yeah, I think that Scott and the questions that come in make great points. Just picking up on some of my own experiences. Maybe to start with what's in front of us on the slide there. I agree with everything Scott said. Just add a bit of colour. So my team looks after the bank's outsourcing agreements, service precedent template agreements for how we engage with suppliers. We launched a project which I won't go into in too much detail here because I can bore people with it offline if needs be, but called Project Heinz. And that was exactly as Scott said. We took our template services agreement and we took 66% out of it. And the risk profile hasn't really changed. There's just less words. It's just less complicated. It's just less difficult. And when we were doing that, we started to apply other lenses to it, like the bank's got a purpose and its values. Well, was there an opportunity then to make it neurodiverse compliant and dyslexia friendly and introduce climate clauses? And the answer to all of that was yes. So we ended up with a much more streamlined agreement, which supported one of our principles, which was managing down legal demand. So we get fewer queries, we're able to handle them more swiftly, and contracts that agreed more simply. Other stuff we've looked at, just as Scott said, playbooks, we've got operating principles in place with our friends in procurement, guidance notes, looking at using legal design to frame the document set easier, and all of that has resulted in less demand on our time to free us up to do some of the things we spoke about earlier on. Just a couple of other points I jotted down as you were both speaking earlier on. One relates to strategy, and you mentioned, Zeem, around firefighting, and you build these strategies with the best of intentions, and then you go back to the day job and you've got an inbox which is exploding. One thing we've tried to do is sort of obsess about our strategy and how are we delivering that, and bringing it back weekly to how are we delivering against it, celebrating success, which I think feeds into reporting as well. And I see reporting, which I know I saw the 6% votes for it earlier on. It's easy to see it as boring, and to touch on one of the questions that came up about the why. To me, there's a sort of offense and defense side to reporting. The defense is, why do we exist? Marianne mentioned about an organization outsourcing their entire in-house team. We need to be able to pinpoint, why do we exist? Why have 450 lawyers? What value do we bring? So there's a sort of defense aspect of it, but there's also the more advocacy type approach, not just the technical legal work that we turn documents around more quickly and we're on it, we've got great templates. But to the point earlier on around supporting your organization, how are we delivering the bank's purpose? How are we role modeling the bank's values? We've all got, I like to think, big brains. How are we delivering it against more than just the technical work? That I found as a bit of a game changer, because a lot of stakeholders just assume that you're in this ivory tower and you just manage legal risk. When you get out of that space and you start to get your hands a bit dirty, as I said earlier on, and start to use, add value in the purpose space, or you're overtly delivering against the bank values, that's when stakeholders start to view you differently. And dare I say, it also makes the job more fun.
Thank you, Kenny. All true. Marianne, I think you might find it hard to top, but with your experience, go for it.
It's hard to top Kenny for sure. But I'll tell you that, when I went into that company who'd outsourced their entire law department, but I did it there, and I do it with every company I join, is to look at the bills. That's the first thing that I do is check out the bills. They definitely tell a story about the company, its management, and they help me to analyze pain points and opportunities to bring value. You've got to be a great juggler if you're a general counsel, because prioritization is critical. When I was a brand new lawyer and I was very green and very young, a senior person came and sat in front of my desk. Very big, imposing guy. And I knew just what he wanted. He was the head of marketing and sales, and he wanted me to put his stuff first. And I said, I didn't even look up. I said, you could sit there all day, but unless you can convince me that you have a higher priority, I need to do what I need to do. Stick to your guns. Make sure that you're taking care of what you need to do, because you're going to be judged by how successful you are in meeting your company's goals and how successful you're meeting your own law department's goals. Any efficiency that you create is going to show that you are attuned to being value added. And I firmly believe in the use of technology. As soon as I was a general counsel, I dedicated one of my paralegals to being the technology person to bring more and shop for technology. I sit on an AI company board, and I love it. You need to embrace what's new and what's opportunistic. You need to show that you're a leader, and it really is noticed. If you do this, you'll be very successful and you'll always be listened to. I also want to go back to the concept of, data. Data is power. I can't tell you how powerful it is. Data and people. So if you are benchmarking, you are always going to get support for your policies and your programs, because you'll show that it is good business and that it creates great value. So I really applaud what we're doing for technology, and I'll encourage you to contact our colleague on the panel to see how you can be helped. Thank you, Zim.
Thank you, Marianne. And Scott, I think just a quick change of order, given that we, I think, pushed a little bit for time. I think tech has been covered. So before we go to the poll, just one comment from me, and then to hand to Neve for the poll, and then to you for the section on reporting. And perhaps there you could also bring tech to bear. But I think this is a good moment to weave together some points, and Marianne raised some of them in her last comments, and Kenny, you made the point as well. So let me chip in here. What you're seeing on screen is the result of a McKinsey study in 2023 in relation to organizations and working behaviors and the challenges facing people and organizations today. Now, again, most of these things are not new. We've all, well, many of us have experienced the pandemic firsthand as leaders or as parts of law functions or having interacted with law functions. So I would like to think, and it's a fairly data-heavy slide, so I'd like to think that there isn't anything particularly new here. But to come back to what Kenny and Marianne said, let me chip in two particular points. This morning, the question was asked around integration. And one of the responses I gave was, don't be a lawyer. And people thought for a minute I had lost the plot. What I meant by that was, stop behaving, thinking, and acting like a lawyer. Think, behave, and act like a business person with legal skills and legal knowledge. Immerse yourself in the business. Do things that are not, strictly speaking, of a legal nature. Town halls, site visits, floor walks, join business chambers, engage in speaking events. That's all in one sort of bucket. In another bucket, be a leader of people. It strikes me that in many high intensity, volatile, and in some instances corrosive business environments, the front line of the legal function are the counsel and advisors in the field. They will tend to take the creaks first, not the ones at the top. So be attentive, engage, co-create, invest in resiliency programs, invest in learning and development programs, and above all, an opportunity for ambassadorship. Why is all of that relevant? Because if you've got a team, you're going to be much better. If they know what's important to you, it's important to them. But they will also cause the knitting in field with the business. So really in two broad themes, don't just be a lawyer, do things that are not legal, technical in nature. Secondly, be a leader and an investee or investor rather in people. I think with that, let's turn to the next poll, poll 3. Niamh, over to you, and then over to you, Scott, for reporting. Thank you.
Okay, so this next poll, you should now be able to see it on the screen, just looks at your biggest challenge when it comes to people. So do you feel that's maintaining or increasing resource budgets? Do you feel it's perhaps the attractiveness of your organization to attract talent? Maybe it's accessing new expertise and skill sets. It might be change. It might be actually the change and transformation that's required to do lots of the great things we've spoken about today in terms of the in-house legal function. It might be creating or providing career development opportunities or skills development and training. Retention, is it difficult to keep your people? Or if it's something else, as usual, pop it in the chat. We'd love to hear from you. So great, lots of responses flying in. So I am conscious of time. We will just give this, do our normal countdown. So 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. Excellent. And we will close off the survey now and share the results.
Thank you, Niamh. Again, in the interest of time, I don't think we have an opportunity to go through each of these, but there are some linking themes. And I think the question of reporting is actually quite relevant because after all, how does one motivate for increased resources and budgets? Or how does one underpin skills development and training if you can't report, if you can't establish KPIs, if you can't bring that into the continuous improvement process? So unfortunately, we don't have time to analyze the data in detail, but I think with that as a backdrop, perhaps, Scott, over to you. And if you do want to touch on the data, please feel free.
Thanks very much. Well, I think it's right, actually, that we've just got a couple of minutes for this based on the survey poll that we had at the start of this. And in fact, I'm also hoping the lack of time will mean there's not a chance to rerun it, because it'd be quite embarrassing if the poll went down even further. But I'm just going to say a couple of words. We've had some really good comments already, which I agree on. I mean, really, actually, we should have been calling this, rather than reporting, we should be calling it data, to be honest. I wonder whether people have given different responses. Are you interested in data? Because all reports do is they share data, as we know. And data, I think, really is interesting. So, look, it's fair to say that lots of organizations with their legal teams just don't have the tools to collect, much data beyond perhaps total spend. And even that might be a challenge to do. Certainly what we do with clients when we're working with Dentons Helix, or a bit more broadly, is collect huge volumes of data. And some of it, I'll just say very briefly, is operational in nature. So what you've got up here are a few examples of the sorts of reports we give clients. Some of them are dashboards, like in the top right-hand corner, the legal request report, which is breaking down the different sorts of matters we're doing, different parts of the business, different complexities, how long we're taking, and so on. And that's kind of a live dashboard that we can click into using our Dentons Direct platform. The top left and bottom left-hand corner are different sorts of operational data, and what these do is efficiency of contracting, actually. So how long does it take to do a certain sort of contract? And we would track that over the course of weeks, months, and years, in fact. And what you hope to see is that we get better and better doing those as the time goes down. In fact, as is an example on the screen. The bottom left-hand corner is a scattergram. It's quite a cool one, because what that's doing is it's measuring how long it takes for different areas of the business to do contracts, both in terms of lawyer time, but also time to contract from start to finish. And you get some interesting stuff there. So you might, for example, get the marketing teams doing it sort of in I don't know, 1 week and 3 hours of legal time, and the tech team's doing it in, say, 6 weeks and 50 hours of legal time. It doesn't mean one's right and one's wrong, but you get some quite interesting data there. But actually, the final point I will make here, because I just want to make sure that there's a bit of time for any final comments, is to say that what's most important really is to think very carefully about what data you want to collect and how's that going to move the dial for you. How is that going to help you contribute towards the organization's strategy? And we work with clients very specifically, and we collect all sorts of weird and wonderful data. So I can tell you for one client, the data we're collecting isn't really this stuff, although we collect it. It's just 2 data points this quarter. One of them is, what is the customer satisfaction score you're getting and feedback from the business, the work you're doing. The other one is, what percentage of contracts do you get in data protection indemnity? So it's very, very specific, actually, aligned to particular areas of risk. So we could spend a whole session on data and perhaps we will, but that's all I'm going to say.
Scott, I think there was another question which perhaps I'm going to ask, and I think we've got a minute or two. We can flick to the next slide, but just to say that there was a question in the chat. Excuse me. And if I may, could I just ask, the question was really around legal tech, and why is legal tech featuring so low in the stats? And I was busy typing an answer, but since we have a minute or two, perhaps could I turn to you, Kenny, just for a view on legal tech in legal functions, relevance, the weighting, and whether all legal tech or no legal tech adds value to a business ultimately. How does one judge that and go about selecting relevant tech?
I'll be quick, given the time. I think there's 2 sides. I think one, I think some of the selling of legal tech, there's been a lot of hyperbole around it, which has led to dissatisfaction. On the buying side, I think there's been sometimes an attraction to shiny things without necessarily working out what is the problem I'm trying to solve. You put those 2 things together and you lead to disappointment. And that's one of the challenges. AI, and we've done very well in the 59 minutes, we haven't spoken about it much, but it will be really interesting to see what that does to us. We use some legal tech. There's obviously challenges around budgets as well. Legal often isn't high on the list of priorities for spend at an organization, but yeah, that I think there's some thoughts on it, Zim, in terms of why it's not necessarily taken off the way it might have.
Well, proof, everybody, that we don't collude, we don't preconceive. We're just great minds, all 4, 5, 6 on this call. As Kenny spoke, I sent off my response to Maria to your question, and I think it lines up almost 95% if I'm using the term data. But with that, let me just say, I think this honestly could have been a conversation that could have gone on for hours. And perhaps just 2 points. Please feel free to reach out to any one of us for a direct engagement. And Kenny, I realize you're not directly part of Dentons, but you have such a wealth of knowledge in a highly regulated environment and such, I think, an immense portfolio. It would be lovely to get the benefit of your experience. And I know I speak for my colleagues, including myself, in saying, please feel free to reach out. And then also, as far as some of the more nuts and bolts solutions and the practical tools, tips, and processes are concerned, that's exactly what Scott, Ashrees, and the Helix team are known for and successfully deploy and have done for several years. So if you need that detail, need demos, or need engagement, I'm sure I can volunteer their skilled services. I think with that, Neve, I'm going to hand back to you for the close. Thank you.
Thank you, Zaim. I will keep it very brief. We're at time. We'd love to hear what you thought of today's session. Pop us a note in the chat. We certainly could have stayed, as Zaim said, for hours on this topic. We could have run a session for hours on this topic. And I know it was keen to hear the views of our panelists. So do let us know what you thought of today's session. Would you like more, less? What did you honestly think? I want to say a huge thank you to all the panelists today, in particular for their honesty and their directness and their calling it as it is, which was so refreshing. and in particular for their considered views and work in terms of inputting and prepping for today's session. Of course, to everybody who is on the call today, we are really looking forward to continuing the discussion, including on AI, as you'll see from the upcoming sessions over the next number of months. So thank you for your attendance, engagement and participation today. And if you are looking for a copy of today's slides or for anything in relation to the program, you'll see the email address on the screen. But that concludes today's session. Have a lovely day wherever in the world you are.